will be dealing in the coming weeks with different sugyas associated with the Yomim HaNeroim. And I was asked to give this first year about Hidur Mitzva. We will focus on the sugyas of Chag HaSukkos. Lulav Esek Sukkah will touch upon Mitzvah's Shofar, but this is one of the greatest sugyas in Shas. In a very short shiur, we could only touch upon the yesodis, the fundamentals. Anyone that wants to delve deeper into this sugya, the depth and breadth of this sugya, I would strongly recommend taking out a Minchas Osher Klolei HaMitzvahs. Of the many Sforim I wrote, this is one of the special Sforim. Klolei HaMitzvahs came out exactly 2 years ago, right after the passing of my late Eishes Chayil, and my dear friend Reb Matasyo Eliezer Karasik, also known as Mark Karasik, graciously funded the Sefer, Le'ilui Nishmosa. So it's about 25 pages in Minchas Osher Klolei HaMitzvahs dedicated to the sugya of Hidur Mitzvah. And what we will be discussing today is only a fraction. Like the Kohen Gadol B'Yom Kippurim, when he read from the Sefer Torah and he said, Yoise Mamasha Kosov Kan, Yoise Mamasha Anikoira Kosov Kan. So we learn from Pashas V'Shalach from Shir Hayam, Zakeli V'Anvei, Hisnoa Lefonav B'Mitzvahs. Shabbos Kuf Lamed Gimel is the basic source, also brought in the beginning of Masechet Nozia, Beis Omid Beis, Sukkah Yud Aleph Omud Aleph. It's not a fun of the mitzvahs. Tzitzis Noah, Shoifa Noah, Sukkah Noah. According to Rashi's Gersa, Talis Noah. Everybody quotes Rashi, nobody quotes Rabbeinu Yoina. Masechet Avos, Perek Beis Mishnah Aleph. As a derech yishorish yavo lo ha'adam. Kol shu. Are we connected?
Yes, we are connected. The Rav is heard perfectly.
So in Masechet Sukkah, as in Nozia, as in Shabbos, it's not a fun of b'mitzvahs. Is this a din d'oraisa or maybe a din d'rabbanan? Pashtus is a din d'oraisa. Why not? The Gemara Darshans a posik zekeli v'anveu. Kach kosa v'shag esari b'simin vav. However, the Ritva in Sukkah Daf Yud Aleph, the Rikva comments, if it would be a din d'oraisa, it would be ma'akev b'di'eved. If it's d'oraisa, there is no lechatchila. Minchas Osher Moedim Chelek Aleph. There's a huge discussion about this very question. Do we find a concept of lechatchila and b'di'eved b'mitzvahs d'oraisa? Or is the entire concept of a mitzvah lechatchila only relevant by the Rabbanans? The Ritva maintains if Hidur Mitzvah would be the Uraisa, would be Ma'akev. And it is not Ma'akev, and therefore it's a din the Rabbanon. La'nius daiti afushe plukte lo mafshinan. It's not necessarily a machlokes. I think Hidur Mitzvah ikroi min ha-Torah. Zekeli v'anvehu. It's not a fun of the mitzvahs. How? When? In what way? Nimsar hadavar lechachamim. So whenever we learn a general concept, which is Minatayra, but the details are nowhere to be defined. Nimsar hadavar lechachamim. And one of the big yesodis I discuss very often is the yesod of Nimsar hadavar lechachamim. So Minatayra, Odem Sorach Lachabev es ha-mitzvahs. And like Bnei Yisrael declared by Kriyas Yamsuf and Yitzias Mitzrayim, Zekeli v'anveu. But how do we define Hidur Mitzvah? Nimsa davar chachamim, and therefore it all depends on das chachamim. And that would be the only explanation why in some sugis we find that Zekili Vaveyu is miyakav b'di'evet. And I'll give examples. Lulav Hayavesh, in the very first Mishnah in Perek Lulav HaGozul that we're learning. So Lulav Hayavesh is posul. Rashi writes, Zekeli va'anvehu. Tosfos disagrees, and Tosfos argue, if it's Zekeli va'anvehu, it wouldn't be miyakav b'di'evet. Sefer Torah Noah, Shiroim Noam, Sukkah Noah are not miyakav b'di'evet. And if the Mishnah says Lulav Hayavesh pasul, it cannot be because of Zekeli va'anvehu. So Tosfos quotes the Gemara, pre-8 Hidur. Lulav Hayavesh is not Hidur. But according to Rashi, it's based on Zekeli va'anvehu, so why is it miyakav b'di'evet? So we do find Zekeli va'anvehu, which is ma'akev b'di'evet. However, we must find another way to be miyashiv shitas Rashi. It's a Gemara meforeshes, as quoted by Tosfos and Sukkah daf lamed aleph, Lulav Hayavesh pasul, because it's not Hidur. So all the Rishonim quote the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says, Lo ameisim ya hallelujah. But the Ritva writes that that is derech ha-Yerushalmi, to bring additional drushes, even though einom ikar. So how do we understand Rashi? When Rashi says in the Mishnah, Lulav Hayavesh pasul because of Zekeli va'anvehu, I think the only way to understand Rashi would be to assume Rashi just wants to bring a dugma ma'alma, that the Torah is makbed, the Torah is mahadar, and the beauty of a cheftzeh the mitzvah, and that is why we interpret Hidur to exclude Lulav Hayavesh. Do we find any other source in Shas in which Zekeli va'anvehu is miyakav b'di'evet? Yes, Gittin daf chaf u'med aleph. Harei shehoyo tzorech lichtov es Hashem, v'neschaven lichtov Yehuda, v'to'o v'lo hitil bo daled. He made two grave mistakes. Actually, he needed to write Shem Hashem, Shem Havai, Yud Kei Vav Kei. But by mistake, he thought, he obviously had impaired eyesight, and he thought he needs to write Yehuda. And then, Baruch Hashem, he made a mistake, and he forgot the Daled. So he actually did write Shem Hashem, but the problem is, he wasn't Machavan Lishma, because he intended to write Yehuda. So there's a machlekes of Yehuda v'chachamim. Yehuda says, Mavar of kulmes umekachoi. He just rewrites the same four letters. V'mekachoi. Chachamim say, Ein Hashem min hamuvchar. And why not? Zekeli va'anvehu. And ksav al gav ksav is posel afilu b'di'evet. So we do find an additional source that Zekeli va'anvehu was miyakav, even b'di'evet. However, Reb Yosef Shol Natanzon, Baal Shalas Teshuvas Shoyel Umeisher, in his Askama to the Keses Sofer, which is one of the great sforim of Reb Shlomo Gansfried, the Baal Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. And Reb Yosef Shol Natanzon, in the Askama to the Sefer, argues that this drosha in Gittin Chof Medala, Zekeli va'anvehu, is not the same drosha as Shabbos Kuf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis. It's not a fun of the mitzvahs. It is another drosha. And the emphasis, the dogish in this drosha is Zekeli va'anvehu, referring to Shem Shumayim, and not to the general concept of Hidur Mitzvah. But that goes against Rashi, because Rashi in Gittin daf chaf, when the Gemara says, Ein Hashem min hamuvchar, mishum dechsiv Zekeli va'anvehu, Rashi quotes Sukkah Noah, Sefer Torah Noah, the drosha that we do find Shabbos Kuf Lamed Gimel. So l'chayra, we do find in some sources that Hidur Mitzvah would be miyakav even b'di'evet. So we must assume Nimsar hadavar lechachamim. But I will share my ashkaf on this inyan. I think that when we're dealing with a broad and general concept of It's not a fun of a mitzvahs, which refers to the chefza, the mitzvah. Having a beautiful sukkah and a beautiful tzitzis and a beautiful shofar and a beautiful sefer Torah, it cannot be ma'akev b'diavad, because how do we define beauty? There's a saying, it's not anywhere in the Torah, but it's relevant. Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. But it's also correct al pi halacha. How do we define Sefer Torah Noah? Shiroim noim, a beautiful mantle for the Sefer Torah. So how do we define exactly what's a sukkah Noah? There's no limit to the beauty one could beautify his sukkah. So this cannot be miyaka b'diavad. However, when Chazal are mechadish a chiddush mesuyim, which is clearly defined, even though it's based on zekeli v'anveyu, it could be ma'akav b'diavad. And therefore, ksav al gabe ksav b'sefer Torah, theoretically, even though it is zekeli v'anveyu, could be ma'akav b'diavad. The Rambam is mashmit the halacha of zekeli v'anveyu. And I did not see a reasonable explanation, but called divrei achronim. The Rambam doesn't bring any of these specific halachas. He doesn't bring the general idea of zekel v'aveyes and olafon of mitzvahs. It's a gemara a few times in Shas, but the Rambam doesn't write it. Neither does he write sukkah Noah, shofar Noah, tzitzis Noah. Rani is daiti. The Rambam's understanding is it's just a midas chasidus. The entire concept of Hidur mitzvah, besides the sources in which Chazal deal with a specific halacha, eged halulav, milas tzitzin shi'eh miyakven esamila, ksav al gabe ksav. These are halachas. Some of them are ma'akev, some of them are not ma'akev. But the general concept of Noah having a beautiful chefza, according to the Rambam, midas chasidus. And there are many midas chasidus in Shas which the Rambam doesn't bring in Mishnah Torah. The Meiri Shabbos Kuf Lamed Gimel writes, Ra'ui lo'ila odom lehishtadel le'sader b'mitzvahs. Derech ha'ora amru zakeli v'aveyes no'alafon of b'mitzvahs. This definition, this language, derech ha'ora amru, we find a few times in the Meiri. And the understanding is, it's a hanhoga nachayna, derech ha'chasidim. And the Meiri writes a person should be mishtadel le'esnoa b'mitzvahs. That is my understanding, and that is why the Rambam does bring eged lulav, zakeli v'anveyu. In Hilchas Mila brings the din of tzitzin shi'eh miyakven and samila. In Hilchas Sefer Torah brings the din of ksav al gabe ksav, because in these sources, zakeli v'anveyu deals with specifics and halachas that are clearly defined and mugdar. But the general idea of beautifying a chefze de mitzvah, according to the Rambam, is not Hilchas Psikta. It's midas chasidus, Kilshoin ha'meiri derech ha'ora amru, and that is why it is not found in Rambam. So in my Svarim, first time in Chasosha Masechet Shabbos, Minchasosha Moyadim, and the last version, the last Nusach, is in Minchasosha Kroli HaMitzvahs, as I mentioned before. I explained Shnei Dinim Behidur Mitzvah. It's not very often that I say Shnei Dinim. Brisk is very fond of Shnei Dinim. I usually prefer one complicated din, one complex din, than Shnei Dinim. But in Hidur Mitzvah, it's clear to me, Shnei Dinim Behidur Mitzvah. One din is Hidur in Chefze de Mitzvah. And that is the Bryce of Shabbos Kuf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis. Sukkah Noah, Shofar Noah, Tzitzis Noah, Talis Noah, according to Gersas Rashi, Sefer Torah Noah, V'korcha B'shiroim Noim. That is examples of Hidur in the Chefza. But there also is a concept of Hidur b'shleimus ha'maisa, in the way you perform mitzvahs, to perform mitzvahs b'shleimus, with all dikdukei hadin, dikdukei ha'halacha. And I want to bring about 5 or 6 examples. In my sforim, there are some more. Shomeya ka'oina. The basic sugya of Shomeya ka'oina is in Sukkah Lamed Ches. Twice in Shas. Sukkah Lamed Ches, Medalav Brochas, Chof Harav, Med Beis, Taisus writes, yes, there is a din Shomeya ka'oina b'kol mokom, and you could be yoitz all the mitzvahs shebediv al alidei shmir, whether it's Kriyas Shema or Tefillah or Meya Brochas or all the mitzvahs shebedibur. But it is preferable to daven on your own. So a person could daven with his mouth. He could daven with his ears. He could either verbalize tefillah or listen to others. Taisus writes it's preferable to daven with your mouth. In Sukkah, the Lashon of Taisus is mitzvah min hamufchar. In Brochas Chof Harav Med Beis, the Lashon of Taisus is Hidur mitzvah. Is this the same Hidur as Shofar Noah, Sefer Torah Noah? I don't think so. If your name is Yosel Rosenblatt, maybe yes. If you're a great chazan, why would you listen to others? Daven on your own. It'll be more appealing and more beautiful than anyone else davening. But if your name is Usha Weiss, probably would be better to listen to others, to a good built fella, and not say it yourself. So to me, it is clear this type of Hidur has nothing to do with a chefza. It's a Hidur b'maisa hamitzvah. Shomeya ka'oina, but it is only second best. Shomeya is ka'oina, as if. But it is preferable to be makayim mitzvahs lefi pashtus inyanom. That's my hagdorah. Lefi pashtus v'shleimus inyanam. Where do we first find a similar concept? Kiddushin mem aleph omed aleph. Shlichoi shel odam kemoisoi. However, the Gemara says mitzvah bo yoisem v'bishluchoi. You could perform many mitzvahs al yidei shliach, but it is always preferable to be makayim your mitzvahs yourself. Do it on your own. Don't rely on others. In a similar venue, Shomeya ka'oina, but you're relying on others. You're yoitza with his tefillah, with his brachas, with his kriya. It is preferable, do it yourself. So this is one example. Taisus and brachas calls it Hidur mitzvah. It's not a Hidur in the chefza. It's not a Hidur in beauty. It is a Hidur in shleimus hamaisa. Another example would be very first Mishnah in Perek Arba Psochim Tzadik Tesum and Weiss. Erev Yom Tov in the afternoon, one cannot eat a Suda. Kadei sheyochel matzah l'teyavoin. He should eat matzah by night with simcha l'teyavoin. Interesting. Rashi, Rashbam, both say Mishum Hidur mitzvah. Once again, it has nothing to do with Shofar Noah, Tzitzis Noah, Sukkah Noah. It's a Hidur, not only b'shleimus ha'maisa, b'shleimus ha'kavona. It's a Hidur in Simchas ha'mitzvah. Sheyochel matzah l'teyavoin. The entire concept of Hidur by Ner Chanukah in Shabbos Chof Aleph. Mahadrin el kol echad v'yechad. Once again, what is the Hidur? You could rely on others. It is preferable to do it yourself. Neri shebeisoi, you're makayim the mitzvah. But we prefer ner lakol echad v'yechad. The Rambam is a different approach, but we're not seeking Ner Chanukah today. I'm just bringing the sources briefly. According to Ramon, our minig, what is the Hidur of ner lakol echad v'yechad? Instead of being yoitza with another member of the family, do it yourself. And that is similar to mitzvah bo yosem b'shlichos, similar to shomeya ka'oina. Prima Godim, Tov Reish Nun Vav, quoted by the Bialocha, has a gewaldige chiddush. Hidur Mitzva Shlish. That is not in the basic sources of Hidur Mitzvah, but rather in Bava Kama Daf Tes. So you need to add a third of the expense to be Mahader b'mitzvahs. Lefi Pashtus Halacha, you could buy an esek for $10. You need to add a third to buy a more beautiful esek. I'm fully aware you don't buy an esek for $10. But anyway, you need to add on a third to be Mahader. So the Prima Godim and the Bialocha have a gewaldige chiddush. If there's a machlokes in Poskim, and you could rely on the lenient opinion, you need to add a shlish to be yotzei yedei chayva according to the more stringent opinions. To be machmir kedas machmirim, you need to be moisef a shlish, which is a chiddush. And once again, it's a hidur that is not associated with beauty, but shleimus ha'maisa. Oifen kiyumam shel ha'mitzvos. Tov kuf pei and Hilchos Shofar. The Bach says, Kol ha-shofar is ksherim, misem en ha-mufchar ba'ayel. And why is that? Rosh Hashanah Tezayin. Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael tikelefona b'shofar shel hayel v'ani yizkor lechem Eloi shel Yitzchok ben Avram v'malani alechem kilo akadetem es atzmachem. The Bach says you need to add a third. If you could buy a shofar shel hayel, but it costs more than another shofar. The Taimanim, some of them use a shofar from an antelope called the kudu. It's a very beautiful, long shofar. But it's a misam and a mufra shofar shel ayel, and the Bach says you need to be moisef shalish. Another example of Hidur Mitzvah, which is not associated with beauty, but with shleimus ha'maisa. Va'al kulam, in Yom Edafayin, Yom Edalaf, the Gemara says, Kohen Gadol b'Yom Kippurim. So I mentioned shofar. We're dealing with sukkah, and now at least the halacha of Yom Kippurim. Bezman shebeis hamikdash hayakayim, and the avodas hayoim was al yedei Kohen Gadol, and the Kohen Gadol read various parshas from a Sefer Torah. In Yom Edafayin, Yom Edalaf, the Gemara says, Kol echad v'echad mevi Sefer Torah mebeisoi. Rashi explains, why did the people come, everybody with his personal Sefer Torah? Laharois noyai shel Sefer Torah v'tiferes baleho shemahader b'mitzvos. Noyai shel Sefer Torah, the beauty of the Sefer Torah is only half of the inyan. Tiferes baleho shemahader b'mitzvos, the beauty of Klal Yisrael. So when we are Mahader b'mitzvahs, it is not only the mitzvahs that are beautiful, we are beautiful. Noyo shel Sefer Torah on one hand, Tiferes Baleo on the other. So I brought various sources. Yes, the fundamental Brisa, Shabbos Kuf Lamed Gimel, deals with Hidur Mitzvah of the Chefze, but there are many sources in which we find Hidur Mitzvah b'shleimus ha'maisa. My argument is that the two basic sugyas, Shabbos Kuf Lamed Gimel, dealing with mitzvahs mila, Tzitz and Shiem Yaakov and Samila, and Eged HaLulav in Sukkah Yud Aleph or Med Aleph, do not belong to the first category of Hidur Mitzvah, but rather to the second. They have nothing to do with the beauty in the eyes of people. Shleimus ha'maisa. What are Tzitz and Shiem Yaakov and Samila? If one removes most of the orla, he was yotzei yedei chayvosoi b'mitzvahs mila, and the child is no longer an orel, and that is based on the general concept of ruboi kikuloi. However, Chazal teach us, ruboi kikuloi is somewhat of a b'diavad. Shlichus shel Odom Kamoisa is somewhat of a b'diavad. Shomea Ka'oina is somewhat of a b'diavad. But Pashtus u Inyan shel Tefillah is davening with your mouth. And Pashtus Kavonas HaTorah b'kiyum HaMitzvahs is each and every one of us should perform his mitzvahs on his own. And Pashtus in Yonoi shel Mitzvahs Mila is to remove the Arla. and therefore, mitzvah min hamufcha, to remove the entire Arba, not rely on Rubai Kekuloi, and that is Tzitzin Shi'ei Miak V'Nesamina. Eged Halulav. Does it have to do with beauty? I don't think so. Because al pi halacha doesn't make a difference how you tie the lulav. You could make a beautiful kaishalim. You could use wire. You could use thread. You could use any rope. You just need to tie together lulav, hadas, va'araba. Sometimes it's not going to be as beautiful as it would be without the eged. And therefore, in my opinion, eged the lulav is a hidur in lekicha tamo. V'kach lo madati maloshan Rashi suka lamed zayin omed aleph. Mitzvah la'ogdom sheyehe lekicha achas. According to Rav Yehuda, eged is ma'akev. If they're not tied together, you're not yoitza. Chachamim say you are yoitza. But even according to the Chachamim, it is preferable. It's a hidur in velokachtem. It is more lekichatamo. Like Rashi says, lekicha achas. And therefore, me'ikar adin doesn't make a difference how you tie together. There's an amazing Chasam Sofer, Sukkah Lamed Vav. The Chasam Sofer brings the minig of Koishalach. So most Hasidim use a Koishalach. So do I. Moiri Verabi used the Koishalach, the Divrayats of the Kloisim Magareb, and so did my father. So do I. The Chasam Sofer rejects it. Now the Chasam Sofer argues you're not Yoitza because you need Shnei Kshorim, Zel Gabi Zeh. And the Chasam Sofer says Hidur Mitzvah is not what people consider to be nice. It needs to be a Hidur Shel Torah. And I never understood this Chasam Sofer. Ofer ve'efer anitachas kapas ragel, but I don't understand the Chasam Sofer. What does he mean Hidur Shel Torah? Of course Hidur Mitzvah is what people consider to be beautiful. How else do we understand Sukkah Noah, Shoifa Noah, Shiroim Noim, a beautiful mantle, the coat of the Sefer Torah? What would be Hidur Shel Torah b'Shiroim Noim? I don't understand. Rabbeinu Yoina, I quoted before, Perek Beis Mishnah Aleph. Eizet derech yeshora sheyavor ha'adam, kol she'teferes lo yisrael v'teferes lo min ha'adam. Rabbeinu Yoina has two different perushim. One of them, he quotes the Gemara in Shabbos, Snor of one of the mitzvahs. And the Lashon of Rabbeinu Yoina is, Sheyifaruhu b'nei ha'adam. People should say, how nice, how beautiful. So I don't understand the Chasam Sofer. Unless we say the Chasam Sofer argues, the hidur of eged has nothing to do with beauty. And that would support my approach. The hidur of eged is a hidur shel Torah. But I would say, yes, but it could also be a hidur of the chefza, not only of the Weiss. So I do think, yes, there is an inyan to have a kosher. Which brings us to various questions. Is the hidur necessarily begufa mitzvah and the gufa chefza? Shoifa noah? Sefer Torah noah? Tzitzis noah? Or is it also beautifying the mitzvah, not in the actual chefza, the mitzvah, but anything that is associated with the mitzvah? So Rashi writes, Talis Noah, not only Tzitzis Noah, both Tzitzis and Talis. Rabbeinu Yoina has the same gersa. Would that prove the Talis is not Gufa Mitzvah? Eretz Tzvi, Koshek Lavarov, one of the great Talmidim of the Avon and Esed, he was a Gevaldige Chachan and a Gevaldige Mefalpel. Eretz Yisrael and Kuf Ches asks, if there's Hidur Mitzvah on the talis because of the tzitzis, maybe you should have a beautiful doorpost, beautiful entrance because of the mezuzah. And maybe you should have a beautiful living room and a beautiful dining room because you have a mezuzah on the door. Interesting question. Shtei tshuvas b'davar. Number one, to me it's a milsa de pshita that talis no is only by a talis hamiyuchedes the mitzvah tzitzis. And I think that going back hundreds, maybe thousands of years, the minig was to have a special talis for davening. So if you put tzitzis on your suit, on your shirt, I don't think there's an Indian of talis noah. I think Rashi refers to a talis shel mitzvah. So even though the mitzvah is in the tzitzis, not in the talis, but in the eyes of the beholder, in the eyes of people, this is a talis shel mitzvah, and therefore Hidur mitzvah regarding the talis. My other argument is based on a chiddush. I know it's a chiddush, but to me it's a milsa de pshita. I think just like by kila'ayim, chut echad shel semer or pishtan renders the entire beged, a beged shel aveira, beged shel shatnez, goes the other way around as well. Al yedei atzitzis, the entire beged is a beged shel mitzvah. And the talis becomes a chefze de mitzvah. And that is why the nusach habrocha is le'satev betzitzis. You cannot be mesatev betzitzis. Ituf refers to the beged, to the talis, not to the tzitzis. The entire talis is tzitzis. Al yedei tzitzis, the entire beged is a beged shel mitzvah. And that is why talis no is hidur mitzvah. But lachoret is a raya meforeshes in the very fundamental brayse. Sefer Torah nu avekorcho b'shiroim noim. But maybe Sefer Torah is an exception, because the Gemara says in Megillah, daf lamed beis u'med aleph, u'oiches Sefer Torah orum nikbar orum. You're not supposed to touch the Sefer Torah. You're supposed to wrap the Sefer Torah in shiroim. And maybe that is why there is Hidur mitzvah b'shiroim noim. The question is relevant regarding mezuzah. So all of us buy a beautiful mezuzah box. Could be glass, crystal, silver, wood. But in every proper Jewish home, you have a beautiful mezuzah. Is that Hidur mitzvah? Probably so, because the box is part of the mitzvah, at least in the eyes of people. The answer on mitzvah is the pasha. But there's no way to be mikaveh mezuzah b'Pesach habayis unless you put it into some kind of a holder to care for the mezuzah, and therefore it's associated with the mezuzah and it becomes hidur mitzvah. Would the same apply to an esrog pushka? I don't think so. Because when you're makayim mitzvahs esrog, you need to take it out of the box. So having the esrog in the box maybe is a reflection, an expression of chibuv mitzvah, but I don't think it is the gather of hidur mitzvah. So yes, talis nu is a hidur, because you wear the talis b'shosha mekayim mitzvahs tzitzis. The mezuzah pushka is a hidur, because the mezuzah is in that box, b'shas kiyum mitzvahs mezuzah. Not so regarding an esrog box. When you makayim the mitzvah, you must take it out of the box, and therefore that would not be defined as a mitzvah. Going back to the koishala, I think it is a mitzvah. It is external, but after all, lulav tzurich eged. Lechatchil, it's part of the mitzvah. And it's b'shas kiyum mitzvah, and therefore I do think, yes, it is hidur mitzvah. Many, many years ago, I think it was approximately 50 years ago, I remember an exciting, fascinating exchange between Mori Verabi, the Divrei Yatzev, Kloisa Magareb, Zechat Tzadik V'Kodesh L'Brocha, and one of the greatest Rosh Hashivas of that era, Reb Cheskel Sarna, the Chevron Rosh Hashiva. So many Rosh Hashivas came for vacation at Kiryat Sanz. There was a Beit Havra'ah of Vad HaYeshivas. And many of the Rosh Hashivas, when they vacationed in Kiryat Sanz, they used to come to see the Rebbe's davening. As we all know, the tefillas of the Tzanzer Rebbe, of the Kloiser Mager Rebbe, were unique. Nothing in our time compared in Avodas Tefillah to see the Kloiser Mager Rebbe davening. Like Rebbe Kiva ben Yosef, Manicha Odom Bezove Zuva, Matzoi Bezove Sacheres, Kebena Mischata Bifnei Yavev. The last Yortzeit of the Kloiser Mager Rebbe said some Divrei Zakora and Divrei Hesped, and I would recommend you try to listen to that Hesped. It's in Lashon Kodesh, but you will understand Lashon Kodesh. Spoke a bit about the Kloiser Mager Rebbe's Avodas Tefillah. So many of the Shivas came just to see him davening, to observe his davening. And Reb Cheskel Sana came into the Kloiser Mager Rebbe and he said, I came to see your davening in the middle of the week, and I came again in Shabbos. And I saw that you have a Shabbos de Katalas, which has a bigger Torah, and it's a more beautiful talis than the talis you daven in the middle of the week. Isn't that a problem of Zekei Van Vebu? If you have two talesim, one is more beautiful than the other, so how could you not use the more beautiful one all week? Doesn't that go against Isnoah Lafanav B'mitzvah, Tzitzis Noah, Talis Noah? So how could you use the talis which is not as appealing and beautiful as your Shabbos one? It was so many years ago, I do not recall how the Kloiser Mager Rebbe responded. I think he delved into a discussion whether the halacha is in accordance to Rashi, that the talis is part of Hidur Mitzvah. And he wanted to argue that Hidur Mitzvah is only referring to the tzitzis and not the talis. However, it's not only Rashi, Rabbeinu Yoina as well. Lanias Daiti, the Hidur of Kvod Shabbos comes before the Hidur of Mitzvah Tzitzis. And above a Kamed of Lamed Beis, the Gemara says that Rav Yanai, Hoyu Misatef, V'yoytze lakabel pnei Shabbos malkasa. So we see from this Gemara that having a special beged for Shabbos is part of Kvod Shabbos. I assume that the Loshen Misatef refers to tzitzis, to a talis, Leisatef b'tzitzis. So in Siman Reish Samech Beis and Shulchan Aruch, we learned that Ksus Nekiah is part of Kvod Shabbos. And the Mishnah Berurah Siv Kotenei writes a person should have a special talis for Shabbos, because the talis is the choshavs, the beged we have. And if a beged is Kvod Shabbos, then a talis definitely is part of Kvod Shabbos. So Lanias Daiti, having a Shabbos the Katalis as a Hidur in Kvod Shabbos, it overrides and comes before the general concept of Hidur Mitzvah. Even though Kvod Shabbos is Medivrei Kabbalah. And at the very beginning of today's Shiur, I said that Hidur Mitzvah might be a Dioraisa. So why would Kvod Shabbos come before Hidur Mitzvah? One of the Yesodis that I was machadish, to me it seems a davar pashut. Specifics come before generalities. Kvod Shabbos is mitzvah's Shabbos. Having a special beged for Shabbos is a hidur in Kvod Shabbos. That comes before the broader halacha of Hidur Mitzvah, which is a general concept, all-encompassing, and it touches upon Kol HaMitzvahs Kulam. So my teretz on the kasha of Reb Cheskel Sana would be having a Shabbos the Katalis, which is part of Kvod Shabbos, comes before Hidur Mitzvah of Mitzvah's Tzitzis. As I mentioned before, Yoisa Mamasha Umarti Lefnechem Kosuv Khan. We could learn the Sugya of Hidur Mitzvah an entire year, not only once a week. We could have a koilel learn Tuesday, the Sugya of Hidur Mitzvah all year. But I tried to give you a short and brief synopsis of the Ikari Yesodis that I was machadish in the Sugya of Hidur Mitzvah. And I'm sure that many of the topics, many of the Yesodis we discuss will be le'eza, will be helpful when you learn this Gevaldige Sugya. So if you really want to go into more breadth and more depth about the Yesodis I discussed, I think it's Siman Dalet or Siman Hey in Minchas Osher Klolei HaMitzvos.